Good afternoon and welcome to the ICIT Cyber Legislation and Federal Initiatives webcast 2021 Retrospective and 2022 Prospective. Today I am joined by Don Maclean from DLT, Stan Mierzwa from Kean University, and Don Davidson from Synopsys. Just some quick bios about our panelists, all of which are ICIT Fellows. Long-form bios will be available on our website. Don Maclean is the Chief Cybersecurity Technologist for DLT. There, he formulates and executes cybersecurity portfolio strategy, speaks and writes on security topics, and socializes his company's cybersecurity portfolio. Don has nearly 30 years experience working with US federal agencies. Before joining DLT in 2015, Don managed cybersecurity programs for numerous US federal agencies, including DOJ, Department of Labor, FAA, FBI, and Treasury. Stan Mierzwa is the director of the Center for Cybersecurity at Kean University. There, he lectures on topics including cybersecurity risk management, cyber policy, digital crime and terrorism, and the foundations in cybersecurity. Don Davidson joined Synopsys after 44 years in the US Department of Defense. He is an experienced leader working with the military, whole of government, and public and private partnerships with industry, academia, and international partners. Welcome everyone, and as I stated, long-form bios will be available with this video. Jumping into today's panel discussions, we reached out to members of our legislative community and polled for questions, and some of which we selected and will be presented to the panelists today. Let's begin with, were there any cybersecurity topics that merit legislative consideration that either were not considered in 2021 or should be considered in 2022? And let's start with Stan. Stan, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, Drew, and happy to be here. Good day, everyone. So one area I'd like to put some attention to, or ask that perhaps legislators look at the topic a bit more in detail, and I'll draw upon some data, okay? So there's many areas where one can obtain data. I'm focusing on cyber crime data, and I use something that's very popular and familiar. Many of you already are familiar with the Internet Crime Complaint Center, hosted from the FBI. The IC3 report is a fantastic resource that provides information about what's been reported through IC3 regarding cyber crimes. And one area that I noticed an incredible jump from 2019 to 2020, and it seems so silly, but it's in the area of phishing, smishing, vishing, cybercrime activity. There was over 121% increase. And some may say, well, you could blame it on COVID. You could blame it on anything. Quite honestly, it's there, right? And it's not something that we could ignore. And what's interesting about the whole idea of these fraudulent or scams is that the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, the CARES Act, you may think, oh, that was to benefit people of the United States regarding the COVID pandemic. And yet it was used as an incredible launching board to some of these incredible increases of phone calls, social media, emails that were scammed. Now, I bring this up, you might be thinking, what does this have to do with legislation? Well, quite honestly, these unsolicited scams lead to criminal activity. And there are some approaches that are being taken by the FCC, but I think we need to give a little bit more attention to this topic, because I don't think any of us can go a day without looking at our phones and seeing these scams coming through. And you may think, oh, that's a small, activity. Well, that small activity is leading to some of the greatest numbers in cybercrime. So that's one topic that I want to dive into a little bit more today, and I could provide more in the way of information on that sector. And that is one of the 16 sectors. If you think of CISA's critical infrastructure sectors, well, it's communications, right?
And financial sector as well.
It does. It's interesting that you say that, Drew, because if you look at the report, one of the things that CISA mentions is that it does tie into various other sectors, of the critical infrastructure areas, including financial, including emergency communications, right? When we talk about police and fire, well, they rely on the technology of communications.
Great, thank you, Stan. Don Davidson, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I echo that as well. I mean, clearly, not only with the advent of increased digitization and our leverage of IT, COVID forced us into a work-home environment. And we are all more comfortable doing that now. So therefore, the likelihood that you're working on a mobile device or a laptop is a higher percentage. And you are more comfortable, more at ease, and you tend to click on that link, which you shouldn't do. And so that's Stan's point, is the fact that there's an increased attack surface, if you would, and therefore there's going to be more crime perpetuated in that arena. So I'm not advocating that that we need to lock down everything from a comms perspective. I think we need to leverage the technology. We need to be smart about how we do it. So I would be an advocate of us looking at where we know there are problems. How would we do advisories? CISA's doing some of that now. And then at the worst case would be, where would the FCC or someone have to regulate the space?
Thank you, Don. Don Maclean?
Sure. Well, I would like to see, in general, in line with what my co-panelists have said, and by the way, I appreciate your inviting me on this panel. I would like to see an increased emphasis on cybersecurity awareness in the workforce and in the consumer, the public at large. To do that, though, the messaging that we typically get is, this is the latest hack and it's awful, and we're never going to win. It's just a losing proposition. What I would like to see is cybersecurity awareness through efforts that make this engaging, even fun. In the UK, one of my colleagues runs cybersecurity, or is in charge of cybersecurity for the UK military, and he has actually built a cybersecurity themed escape room that he put on an 18-wheel truck and drives around in the country, and uses it to really create a very fun and engaging means of raising cybersecurity awareness, both awareness and at least a minimal level of skill in dealing with cybersecurity issues. Now, in line with that, one of the things that happens, I think, probably to all of us is, we probably have friends and family who say, oh, I think I'm being hacked. What do I do? Well, why did they call me? Well, they called me because there's no cybersecurity 911, right? You can't, if someone breaks into your house or someone is threatening you physically, you call 911 if you possibly can. Everyone knows that. You do that. That's your response. You don't call Drew and say, hey, Drew, someone has a gun to my head. What do I do? Right? So I would like to see, in line with cybersecurity awareness, a really centralized capacity for dealing with cyber crime that consumers at large could use to respond to these issues. It would consolidate the reporting. It would also give people a sense of security and a known first stop for how to respond, or what do I do, just in the same way that we have a 911 for physical crime. And then finally, just to really spread my net wide here, I'm reading about the potential for conflict in Russia and Ukraine, and one of the precursors to physical warfare is a highly increased level of hacking of Ukrainian websites. A lot of Ukrainian websites have been defaced. Cybersecurity as a means of warfare is becoming a very real thing, and I think we need to address that, from the government's standpoint, and realize that this is something that we really need to pay attention to. It can both be a precursor to warfare and an adjunct in warfare as well. So, cyber 911, security awareness, and cybersecurity as a means of war. So.
Thank you, Don. And to also maybe just add in a slight follow-up to that, as many of our audience are aware, in the January Cyber Legislation and Federal Initiatives webcast, we did mention HR 4055, the American Cybersecurity Literacy Act, that is an attempt to address public cybersecurity awareness and training through different methodologies.
Yeah.
At the moment, that bill does have a very unlikely prognosis of passing, though.
Yeah.
So I do agree with you that we need some sort of ground up training and awareness more than just at the corporate level or at the agency level to inoculate the public against some things like phishing and cybercrime and other digital threats. Moving on to the next question, what legislation or agency initiatives do you each feel should be prioritized in 2022? Don Maclean, let's start with you on that as well.
Sure. Well, some of the big initiative, or the biggest initiative in the government itself, is the whole orientation and push for zero trust security. Zero trust is, the good news about zero trust is that it's a comprehensive approach to cybersecurity that starts from the ground up. The bad news about security is that it's a comprehensive approach to cybersecurity that starts from the ground up. What I mean by that is that I think it's an acknowledgement that what we've done so far is insufficient, and we need to really take a new, cold, clear-eyed look at what we're doing in cybersecurity. On the other hand, some of the initiatives called zero trust are a bit of a boil the ocean approach. In other words, they're trying to do everything all at once. So I would like to see a lot of attention on zero trust, but I would like to see it broken down into manageable chunks so that an agency can actually make it happen, rather than feeling like they can just create a bunch of notional plans and ideals and principles and then do a few things that are in line with that and then call it a day. Now, the other thing, of course, is that, and this executive orders from any president, no matter who they are, have this one thing in common. They tend to set the tone and create some initiative, but they don't carry money with them. It's kind of hard to do things that are expensive if you don't have money. And so that's an area where I think Congress needs to get involved. I mean, Congress controls the purse string. So if we're going to do zero trust, it's going to cost some money. And that's an area where Congress, of course, has to get involved. Another thing, too, is the whole CMMC thing, which applies not to the government, but rather to the defense industrial base. That's been in a great state of flux, and I think it's a great initiative in many ways. Now, we all are aware that it's had some issues, but I think the fundamental idea is a good one. That is, recognize that we as a nation are not just the government, but our government and the vast defense industrial base that serves that government. They hold and control so much information that's of interest to our enemies. We're not going to distinguish between attacking a government site and attacking an industry. I would like to see something substantive in that area, recognizing that the costs are difficult, at the same time acknowledging that the risk of not doing it is pretty high to the nation as a whole. So I would like to see something in regard to financial incentives for defense industrial base, or actually any government contractor, to improve their cybersecurity. And I think the idea of CMMC was, hey, you know what, here's a financial positive reward. You will qualify for DoD contracts if you get this certification. That's been reduced greatly lately with CMMC 2.0, but I think the fundamental idea is a good one. That is basically follow the money and think good things will happen. Same idea as the government. Congress needs to fund the zero trust. There needs to be a positive financial incentive rather than a negative punishment, punitive aspect to improving cybersecurity in the defense industrial base or the government contracting world as a whole. So CMMC and zero trust, those are the things I would like to see emphasized.
Thanks, Don. Don Davidson, what are your thoughts?
So I would echo the topic of zero trust. I do think there are some misperceptions in zero trust. I think that zero trust was developed from an information systems perspective, a network perspective, and I would think that a better terminology would be zero absolute trust or trust but verify. The idea that there's zero trust is you can't check everything all the time. It is more like an intelligence world of situational awareness. Information becomes stale over time, and if you're making decisions on information you collected a year ago, that may not be valid today. And so therefore, if you certified someone or they have an accreditation that's a year or two old, the processes may have changed, the people may have changed. You might need to look at that again to refresh that data. So the idea of quantifiable assurance, how do you collect data to make informed decisions on risk, I think is a fundamental part of the zero trust construct. And I think that, you know, there's been some papers written in that arena to grow that. And I'm an advocate of the risk-based approach and using zero trust in that manner. The other side of the certifications, I think that it's fundamental that we have to do a better job in cybersecurity standards, whether that's in supply chain and software and hardware, et cetera. So how do we measure what is acceptable to feed that quantifiable assurance decision-making process is not all agreed. There are already existing standards in many spaces that are not used. So why aren't they used? And we often just throw out the name, we need a new standard to do X, Y, Z. Well, there may be a standard already there. We're just not using that standard. Why aren't we using that standard? So it actually needs to be a better cataloging of available standards and how they might mesh together to help us to measure risk and make decisions.
Maybe to add on to that, there's also a wide variety for definitions and codification of terms, and I think that ties to what both of you have said so far regarding some of the nebulousness around some of these areas. Stan, do you have anything to weigh in on?
Yeah, you know, just staying on the topic, and these are fantastic insights already. And I think the audience should appreciate this. I know myself, I am already. All of these topics, especially CMMC, is something that we're all starting to learn a little bit more about, and some are further ahead than others. I know myself at my organization, we're trying to figure out how we can help the community in the sector that requires CMMC certifications. And I think putting some attention there is, will be certainly continue value continue to add value. But getting back to the topic that I brought up originally around robocalls and more specifically caller ID spoofing, there's a few things I think that could take a little bit more shape here, formal shape. So just to remind everyone, and I think we all know what this is, but the FCC defines caller ID spoofing as deliberately falsifying the information transmitted to your caller ID. I don't know if any of you are old enough, but I can remember when caller ID became available, and it was a cool thing, but how it's now being sort of weaponized in a way, and we see this with some of the increased cybercrime. But the FCC has done a great job, I think, in creating a starting point. March 17th of 2021, which is a great day, right? St. Patrick's Day for those who celebrate it, right? If you're going to launch an initiative, using a popular date is a good idea. But the acting chairwoman announced plans to stop anti-robocalls. And what they said is they're going to issue the largest robocall fines in FCC history. And so I stopped and thought, I said, fine, that doesn't stop this, right? I mean, it may curtail it. It does hit somebody in the pocket. And they go on to mention how this could be a nuisance. And I think it's more than a nuisance. And especially the data is proving that the cyber crimes are increasing via these technology weaknesses. So I think a little bit more attention in that area. I will say for 2022, I'd love to see some of more action around. They did put together a framework. Some of you might be familiar. It's called the Stir Shaken framework. The acronym is Secure Telephone Identity Revisited, STIR. And the idea here is that getting carriers to say, hey, we will abide by this framework. And I think they were supposed to have it done by the end of June of 2021, but maybe revisiting and just checking on what the status is of that effort in trying to curtail some of these robocalls, which are leading to cyber crimes, would be a fantastic, I think, number one, on the awareness side, if we could understand where we are as consumers and businesses in this area, and then what are the next steps going forward. And there's probably lots of talk going on. I know agencies do great work and they are grappling with these things, but I want to just shed light to this topic and problem that continues to plague us.
Great, thank you, Stan. Let's maybe jump ahead a little bit. Don Davidson, let's start with you on this one. Where should agencies in Congress more actively engage with the private sector and academic stakeholders?
Such a great topic. Thank you for letting me lead off on this one. I think that both legislative branch and the executive branch is doing a better job of engaging industry. We still see cases where there's information or a task that comes in a law or task in an executive order that simplifies the problem and thinks they can fix it in 6 months or 12 months when industry hasn't been able to fix it for a decade. So that's problematic. But at the same time, we're seeing more requests for information prior to the issuance of those rules and regulations in that space. So when they reach out with an RFI, industry has to be responsive and provide that information back on where the complexities are and what are the differences that motivate you from a national security perspective versus global economics, and how do you make those decisions in those trades in the space, because often those rules, regulations, laws are often written from a singular perspective. I applaud the efforts to do more with RFIs and engaging industry. I think there's more room for improvement there, and we're working that both in industry and the public-private working with government.
Thank you. Don Maclean, what do you think?
Sure. I mean, what I've seen in the world of academia, and this addresses some of the issues that my co-panelists have brought up earlier in this session, is that often the academic process to get an accredited course takes so long that by the time a course is accredited, it is nearly obsolescent or obsolete by the time it reaches its reaches its target audience. I think there needs to be in the academic world a greater recognition that technology moves fast, and find a way to get accredited courses that are substantive but also more up to date. I know that years ago I did my master's degree in cybersecurity, and some of the courses I took were really, really old, and I complained to the administration and to the professors, and they said, yeah, you're right, but the process to get this accredited takes years, and by the time we get it accredited and the curriculum done, no one uses that technology anymore. So I think one of the big things in academia is to be able to keep pace more effectively with the advances in technology. What we're seeing then is a lot of commercial companies are chiming in or stepping in to provide that information, when perhaps that's a more suitable role for academia. So, but I'm not an academic, so I hope I'm not offending my co-panelists, particularly Stan. But I do think that's an area that I've experienced personally that I'd like to see to change in the world of academia. So,
now, Stan, you are in academia. What is your perspective on how agencies in Congress can better collaborate with academia and with the private sector? And do you agree or disagree with anything that Don just said?
No, I think Don makes a point. There's so many colleges throughout the globe, right? You don't have to take a class in a building anymore. So you could take a class from your bedroom. I'm sitting at my little desk next to my bed here, and I could be taking a class in Colorado, California, wherever. And I'm based on the East Coast here. So the landscape has grown, right? And this is a trend, and we've seen this happening over the past decade, more remote learning, and as a result of the pandemic, this will continue to grow. So I think you have to find formidable programs. Well, the one thing I will mention to Don M. is if you're looking at cybersecurity programs, one of the things you can do is look for those programs that are certified, or what they call designated, by the NSA. The National Security Agency has Center of Academic Excellence in Cyber Defense and Cyber Research. These are programs that went through very detailed evaluations, and they had to provide evidence, hundreds of pages of evidence demonstrating that they're following the paradigm or at least the goals set by the NSA. So that might be a way of ensuring that you're getting a program that is not just put together. Because quite honestly, with the landscape growing in higher education, there's opportunity for programs, that might be not as, as powerful as others. I see Don D raising his hand.
Yeah, I was going to comment there. I think it's a great point now that you guys are both leveraging about the slowness of academia, but it's also the slowness of security in the digitization world. So we've always, those that have heard me speak before, it's always cost, schedule, and performance, and the user wants it fast and cheap, and they will sacrifice security 95% of the time to get it fast and cheap, and we have to change that mindset. In the cyber awareness, the cyber education that Don Maclean was talking about earlier. The other thing I found encouraging is like I talked about industry having to engage with government and vice versa. I think the same is true for academia. I think the best academic courses I've seen are those that leverage industry and bring in use cases. So they'll have periodic speakers, they're teaching the academic curriculum, but at the same time, they'll bring in someone from DLT, from Synopsys, from wherever, and they will speak on a use case in that arena for cyber. And I think that's a very powerful message to the students.
And actually, that's sort of a natural segue to our final question here. And Stan, let's start with you on this. What do you believe were some of the obstacles for legislation and agency initiatives this year? But also, let's expand the question slightly. What are the obstacles in general that you feel are in academia, the public sector, the private sector, for modernization and cybersecurity efforts that we need to address in order for legislation and agency initiatives to be more meaningful and impactful?
Yeah, so, I'll stay on the topic of collaborations, and let me kind of round back to the topic of the idea of robocalls again, using that as an example. Here we have a problem that's existed for quite some time. And from what I've gathered so far, and there's probably a lot more out there, but at least from me as perhaps, looking at it as a consumer, I look and say, why isn't anything being done technically a little bit more to help the situation? So here's a perfect example. I'm at home, I've got family members at home, we're connected to our internet connection. I'm not connected to the web unfettered, right? I've got firewalls in place, right? Block everything. But yet at the same time, our phones don't seem to be, when it comes to telephony at least, there's no firewall. Yeah, I can call the phone company and say, hey, please block this. Or I could tell my iPhone, oh, block this. But guess what? The numbers are changing. So I'd love to see industry and government and academia partnering to try to find some, really want to solve these problems, right? Could there be a this is so simple and silly, but can there be a firewall for my phone calls? And the thing that's important is because if you look at the guidance that's provided to us as consumers and users, we're told, here, I have a list here real quick of a few things. Oh, hang up, right? If you get a robocall. Oh, okay, thank you, hang up. All right, great. That's forcing me, you're putting the onus on me. Don't answer calls from unknown numbers. Call your phone company. You ever try to call your phone company today? I had a call the other day. I have somebody traveling. I had to add an international. Are you kidding me? You can't call them. So I think we need to find better solutions and focus, right? Look at where the problem points are based on data, and then let's see if we can come up with some better solutions. And finding it for robocalls is a good start, but let's go a little bit further. So this, to somewhat summarize, let's really try to solve some problems.
Great, thank you, Stan. Don
Maclean? Can I say one last thing?
Yes.
Oh, and this is a bit personal to me because I had my dad who recently passed away was living in a assisted living facility. And get this, he didn't even own a home at that point, right? He was living in a facility because he was unable to take care of himself. Well, somebody friended him on the phone, okay? He was getting scam calls and we didn't know about it. Now, he's from a generation of individuals who trusted that called him. He was at the point of spending $30,000 on solar panels for his house. He didn't own a home. So, that to me is a wake-up call because a lot of these issues are targeting those vulnerable populations. And it could be those of the senior, the seniors of our society.
That's an excellent point. Don Maclean?
Well, your questions about obstacles, I think one of the biggest obstacles is just that cybersecurity, although people recognize its importance, is not at the top of the priority list for government. We see tons and tons of legislation in your legislative reports, but so only a tiny percentage of them actually see the light of day. Now, I'm not saying that that's wrong. Some of the other priorities that on Congress's mind certainly should be high priorities. Obviously, COVID and economic relief, things like that have to be addressed. But when cybersecurity is not a priority, then the funding doesn't come through, and that's what concerns me, is that it's great that there's an executive order from this administration saying, hey, do zero trust, but without the money, it's not going to work. So I think that's the biggest obstacle. It always is, isn't it? I mean, it's just getting the money to do what you need to do. In order to get the money to do that, what you need to do, it needs to be a higher priority than something else. That's basically how how things happen, in the world at large. So I think the biggest obstacle is just getting the money to do it. And then also, that's in the government itself. In the private sector, the objections to CMMC that led to its pretty drastic change recently was that it simply cost too much. There was, and the cost especially was difficult to bear for the small and mid-sized businesses. I'll be very interested to see the results of the report mandated by the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, that says, let's look into what it's really going to cost businesses to do this. CMMC was, in my opinion, a great effort in general. One of the things they did not do as well as they should have was to estimate the cost of compliance. They grossly underestimated the cost of compliance, and when it came to actually doing these things, what they had estimated, and they actually put dollar figures down to the penny into the rule, it just wasn't reality. So I think that just simply the cost of cybersecurity up front, whether it's government or business, is the biggest obstacle to getting things done. The problem is these things are quantifiable up front, to get back to something that Don Davidson was saying earlier, but the cost to our nation as a whole over time may be difficult to actually quantify, but it will definitely be real and enormous. So we need to spend the money, pay now or pay later is basically what we're
right. And as maybe a 10-second refresher for our audience, last year up till now, there are around 11,400 bills submitted to Congress. Only 198 deal with cybersecurity, and of those, 26 were enacted by incorporation into another bill, but only 4 bills were able to pass Congress. Cybersecurity bills were able to pass Congress on their own in their entirety. So I think prioritization and, to a degree as well, cost are definitely a large concern. Don Davidson, what are your thoughts?
So I'll go back to the original topic that I talked about on being able to quantify. How do you use standards to measure risk in hardware and software, and to use in a systems engineering perspective? I think that we have to come to the realization we're going to accept risk in some areas, and some of those areas will be more risky environments than others. A good example is the recent executive order on national security systems. It calls out very specific things that are probably above critical infrastructure, and how do you secure those national security systems in a different way. So that means there's going to be more scrutiny, more assurance for the products that go into that ecosystem. So you start having a tiered assurance level, and you need to determine where your products are going to live, and what are you going to expend to certify them to that level, so they can be used in a national security system or in critical infrastructure or for home use. That doesn't minimize the risk that takes place at home, because we're all consumers and we're using IT every day. So there has to be some fundamental basic assurance levels built into all of our IT components that we live and consume every day, live with and consume every day.
Thank you, Don. We're coming up on time here, so I want to thank all of our panelists for being here today, and I want to thank our audience for watching. do each of you want to provide any final thoughts or anything you would like to leave our audience with? Don Maclean, let's start with you.
Sure. Well, those of our audience presumably are people with a vested interest in cybersecurity and the public sector at large. I would urge you to write to Congress and ask to your senator or senators and to your representative in Congress and say, hey, look, here's some issues that I think are important, whether it's robocalls or whatever it might be related to cybersecurity 911, whatever you think is important, get it on your on the radar of your representation in government, because they're not going to do anything unless they hear from their constituents.
Excellent point. Don Davidson?
So I would encourage you to say, yes, write to government and work that arena. I would also advise you, you're a singular voice until you join a not-for-profit organization or a trade association that's your like ecosystem. I think Institute for Critical Infrastructure Technology is a great place to start. Lots of forums this year. Like stated before, the three of us are all fellows there for the ICIT Tech, and so we work that arena because we think it's important to us, and why not leverage lots of expertise when we come together and work together.
Thank you, and also thank you for your praise of ICIT there. Stan, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think the one thing I'll end with is we all, for all of us who are part of ICIT, or if you're watching this recording, you're probably somehow involved in technology, and that's a growing segment. And the one thing I'll say is teach those around you to look at the world a little bit differently when it comes to technology. I can't tell you how many times I talk to students or relatives or friends who are using all sorts of different technologies, maybe in a bit of a risky way, and it's way beyond they can't comprehend standards, but we can be practical and just get them to think a little bit differently about the world around them so that they're not creating any issues. I'll use an example. I say this to my students because I teach lots of students that are pursuing criminal justice. And I say, be careful about what you're doing in social media or anything on the web, because that will be assessed. And someone will be looking that up if you are going to try to get any sort of background approval for who you are, if you're trying to get a position. So think critically.
Excellent reminder, especially for some members of the younger generation, I think, such as myself, who are young professionals. I think those of us who are born into the internet age have a little bit less of a cognizance of how some of those things are perceived. But excellent point.
As Austin Powers would say, oh, behave.
Yeah, I agree.
Fair enough.
We need to hear that, though, Don. I think we all need to hear that once in a while. We need the reminders.
An interesting reference to end on, but thank you very much for your time and expertise. And I want to thank our audience for attending. To our audience, if you would like to see more opportunities like this in the future, more panel discussions, post-webinar, or more agency-focused discussions or legislation-focused discussions, deep dives into legislation, or something like that, please let us know so that we know that there's an interest within our community and we can develop those opportunities accordingly. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you, Drew. And thank you, Stan and Don.
Thank you,
guys.
Thanks, everybody.